We now come to the backbench motion on the persecution of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Siobhain McDonagh to move.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. May I begin to wish all Muslims Ramadan Mubarak. And may I also start by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for granting the time for today's debate and all of those members who are here to take part. On the border of my constituency is one of the largest mosques in Western Europe, able to accommodate 10,000 worshippers. It is little wonder, therefore, that my constituency of Mitcham and Morden and the wider South West London region is home to a thriving Ahmadi community. They help make up a global Ahmadi community numbering millions. For those watching or listening to today's debate who may be unclear, an Ahmadi identifies as a Muslim but does not believe that Muhammad was the final prophet sent to guide mankind. Such a belief sees the Ahmadi Muslim community widely denounced as non-Muslim and persecuted around the world, and I'm saddened to say so often persecuted right here in the UK. To introduce today's debate, I'd like to take us on a global tour from Africa to Asia, Greater London to Glasgow. I'd then like to focus particularly on the persecution faced by the Ahmadi community in Pakistan, before turning to the shocking overspill of hate into the UK that this chamber has a duty and responsibility to address.
My honourable friend give way.
Yes.
I'm very grateful to her. She will know we also have an Ahmadi community in Manchester. And I wonder if she would allow me just to put on the record a tribute to their work in and for the community, and particularly the refuge and hospitality that was offered by their mosque after the Manchester Arena attack last year.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Their desire to help the wider community and not only themselves marks Ahmadis in a particularly way in all our communities.
Well, lady, and I congratulate her on securing this very important and timely debate. If I could add Crawley to the tour that we are going to go on, I would be very grateful. In 2014, in the Langley Green neighbourhood, the Noor Mosque was opened, and as right honourable members will know, the word Noor in Arabic means light, and they certainly do bring light to the local community with their charitable work and community cohesion, and I'm very grateful for that message that they give of love for all, hatred for none.
Again, can I completely agree with the honourable member?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's done well in securing this debate on the Ahmadi community. The Ahmadi community in Scunthorpe area are very small but make a very strong contribution to the area, and I would like to put on record my thanks to all the work they do, and as the honourable member said opposite, love for all, hatred for none. They live those words, and it's ironic that they suffer persecution in parts of the world as a result of that creed.
Siobhain.
Seema, sorry, it was sort of on that point and connected, and I just wanted to follow the contribution as well made by my honourable friend, the member for Stretford and Urmston, and just to recognise the charitable endeavours as well of the Ahmadiyya community, particularly through Humanity First, where they have also raised funds and supported those affected by the Nepalese earthquake a few years ago. But also this weekend will be hosting their global telethon to raise funds for charity.
Right, yeah. And just before I carry on with my global tour, I just would like to say that while all the members here recognise the efforts of the Ahmadi community in their constituencies, former members also identify with their work, and I'm delighted that my friend and colleague Tony Coleman, the former member for Putney, is also here to listen to this debate. To our global tour, I begin in Algeria, where an estimated 2,000 Ahmadis live in fear. Just 6 months ago, in December 2017, 50 Ahmadis were tried on charges related to their religion, with sentences ranging from fines to 5 years in prison. They held 280 Ahmadi Muslims across Algeria who have been arrested on the grounds of their faith in the last 2 years alone. We head east to Egypt, home to approximately 50,000 Ahmadis, and it was here earlier this year the Interior Minister, Mr Magdi Mohammed Abdul Ghaffar, issued orders for the arrest of 25 innocent Ahmadi men and women. But this is just the latest in a long line of persecution against the Ahmadi community in Egypt, with a notable example being the arrest of the community's publications secretary, Ahmed Akateb, to confiscate the publications in his property. Such horrifying persecution can also be found further south, in Burundi. Earlier this year, 13 young Ahmadis were arrested in Bujumbura city, where they were attending a religious education class. The Secret Service raided the mosque and arrested the children on alleged charges of terrorism. For in the eyes of the persecutors, Ahmadi material is seen in such an extremist light. Finally, we head to Asia and specifically to Indonesia, for it is here that the Ahmadi community has existed since 1925, claiming a community of approximately 500,000 people. Of course, it is difficult to know the community's true scale, as revealing oneself as an Ahmadi here can be nothing less than a magnet for persecution.
On that point, I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she's making a very forceful argument. I'd also like to concur with my other colleagues and honourable friends about the contribution of the Ahmadiyya community within Slough. But with regards to Indonesia, just 5 days ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, on the 20th of May 2018, the Jakarta Post reported an unidentified mob attacked and destroyed several homes belonging to Ahmadiyyas and attempted to expel the Ahmadiyya community from Grapek Tanak Eat hamlet in Greneng village. Eyewitnesses claim at least one house was destroyed in the presence of police officers. Would my honourable friend agree that whilst the persecution of the Ahmadiyya community is well documented, more needs to be done to raise awareness of the persecution of the Ahmadiyyas in countries such as Indonesia, as well as Bulgaria and Thailand?
Can I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. In Indonesia, Ahmadi Muslims is not an authorised religion. So when an Ahmadi tries to secure identity documents requiring an authorised religion to be shown, they simply cannot get them. Furthermore, Ahmadi mosques have been burned down, Ahmadis have been denied their voting rights, and they have been driven out of their homes, as my honourable friend, friend has also referred. And I'm afraid to say, in Indonesia, the persecution comes from the very top. In 2008, a joint ministerial decree introduced by the Minister of Religious Affairs, the Attorney General and the Minister of Home Affairs prohibited promulgation of Ahmadi teachings. The Minister of Religious Affairs followed this up with calls for an outright ban against the Ahmadis in 2011. But perhaps the persecution is best illustrated by the calls from the Governor of West Java, who claimed that there was no violence against the Ahmadi community if there was no Ahmadi teachings or practices. The problem, he suggests, will disappear if the beliefs disappear. It is no wonderful, therefore, that just last weekend, 23 Ahmadis sought refuge in East Lombok police station, escaping after an angry mob destroyed their homes in an attempt to expel them from the area. Away from Indonesia, there are currently 10,000 Ahmadi refugees stuck in limbo in countries including Sri Lanka, Malaysia and Thailand, all having fled from persecution in their home countries. Sri Lanka even tried to deport 88 Ahmadis back to Pakistan in 2014, despite claims that they could be at risk in their homeland. And so it is to Pakistan that I now turn. For it is in Pakistan that the world's largest Ahmadi community exists, with an estimated 4 million members. And it is there that perhaps the persecution that Ahmadis face can be most prominently found. Only this morning, I have awoken to terrifying reports of an Ahmadi house and mosque attacked by extremists in Sikolot last night, with mob leaders calling for this to happen to all Ahmadi mosques. The situation could not be more precarious. For an Ahmadi in Pakistan faces widespread hatred from the moment that they are born to the moment that they die. Perpetrators are given free rein to attack innocent Ahmadis in the knowledge that they will never face prosecution for their actions. To understand why, we need to revert back 44 years into 1974, when Prime Minister Bhutto amended the Pakistan constitution to declare Ahmadis as non-Muslim for the purpose of law. 10 years later, under General Zaire, the government of Pakistan made it a criminal offence for Ahmadis to call themselves Muslim, refer to their faith as Islam, call their place of worship a mosque, make the call for prayers, say the Islamic greeting, or propagate their faith. The constitutional right of freedom of religion that is enshrined in Pakistan's constitution is therefore completely violated, with an Ahmadi liable to arrest, 3 years imprisonment and an unlimited fine if they are considered to be behaving as a Muslim.
For giving way. She makes an excellent speech and a really moving speech about the pan-global issues faced by the Ahmadi community, but yet the hate in particular in Pakistan is one that many British citizens have faced and why they became British citizens, and indeed none more so than my late fellow Glaswegian Asad Shah, who tragically was murdered in March 2016. He left Pakistan 20 years before, but sadly the hatred and prejudice still follow them right onto the streets of our own country, and it's important to acknowledge that this is an issue that is right in our midst of our own communities, and we have to address it full on.
Could I completely agree with my honourable friend? Even His Holiness, the head of the Ahmadi faith, is now based in London precisely because of the persecution in Pakistan.
In ways she's being very generous. Would she agree with me that it's somewhat ironic that, as far as I'm aware, it is perfectly in order for me or for her to say Assalamu alaikum as a greeting, whereas in Pakistan it's not in order for an Ahmadi Muslim to do that?
Can I completely agree with the honourable member? This was brought out in our hearing only on Monday of the all-party group's investigation. It never really occurred to me that it wasn't, it was just specifically Ahmadis that couldn't do those things, but that clearly came out.
On that, I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I think the APPG on the Ahmadiyya community, looking into the persecution of the community, and we heard some very harrowing tales, indeed also from the Christian community as to how they are being persecuted. And I think we all need to stand against discrimination in all its guises.
Could I absolutely agree with my honourable friend? I mean, it does seem extraordinary that the persecuted Christian community could do some of the things and act in a way that the Ahmadis themselves couldn't. So there's a real conflict going on there.
Thank you. She's making indeed a very powerful and important speech, and I also pay tribute to her leadership of the all-party parliamentary group that we all, many of us are members of and support. Will she also agree with me that the persecution that's faced in other countries in no way also reflects the positive relationship that goes on so much in our country between Muslims from different countries and of different backgrounds, and including the Pakistani community so much in my constituency, where the relationships are very strong between all of the different Muslim communities?
Can I thank my honourable friend? I wish all the communities in the UK did get on as well as perhaps they do in Hounslow, but there are many instances of the Ahmadis experiencing persecution in the UK and from other Muslim groups. Can I just say that the statistics...
Would my honourable friend give way on exactly that point? And like many other colleagues, I pay tribute to the contribution that the Ahmadi community are making, both in business, commerce, but also very much in community affairs and in public consciousness. But isn't it also a problem that from other countries, some of that hatred is coming in here with attacks on individuals, as we've seen in Glasgow, but also elsewhere, even if they're not leading to murder, and also calls for boycotts on businesses owned by Ahmadis? Shouldn't the authorities be cracking down on this, making absolutely clear this is totally unacceptable in this country?
I completely agree with my right honourable friend. Can I also say that local authorities need to look to themselves as well, because Ahmadiyys in most SACREs, which are the Standing Committee for Religious Education in English in English councils, they're also excluded. You know, some of these things are very close to our respective homes. If we look at the statistical prosecution, the statistical persecution against Ahmadis in Pakistan, 260 Ahmadis have been killed, 379 have been assaulted for their faith, 27 Ahmadi mosques have been demolished, and 22 have been set on fire or damaged. 39 Ahmadi bodies have been exhumed after burial, and 66 Ahmadis have even been denied a burial in a common cemetery, and all in a country with a constitutional right to freedom of religion. Ahmadis in Pakistan live in constant fear that a baseless accusation will be made against them, with the consequences so often proving life-threatening. The persecution is faced from cradle to grave, and so I'd like to describe the day-to-day reality for an Ahmadi living in Pakistan. When a young Ahmadi in Pakistan attends school, they face immediate persecution. Take Fazana, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who gave an honest and saddening insight to Christian solidarity worldwide in her own words. A few of the other children in my school knew that I am an Ahmadi, and what they did was to go and tell other students. She is an Ahmadi, don't play with her or eat with her, stop treating her normally. Her teachers encouraged this, and this is what I find so hard to understand, and abused her both physically and psychologically. Fazana says that they punished her, used her to strike her with sticks and tell her not to sit with the other kids because she is an Ahmadi and so is not allowed to do that. Fazana has now moved school as a result of her treatment. She has decided not to tell her new friends that she is an Ahmadi so that she is free from the persecution that she sees as inevitable. But the discrimination in its education takes many forms, from nationalising all Ahmadi Muslim schools, expelling Ahmadi students based on their faith, or even the editing out of any Ahmadi Muslims contributing to Pakistan's history. Take Professor Abdus Salam, a groundbreaking scientist famous for the work in the field of physics, which awarded him the first Nobel Prize in Pakistan's history. His faith has led to him being erased from the textbooks. These same textbooks may, I remind the Chamber, are rife with biases against religious minorities, textbooks that we help to fund. There simply must be greater accountability by our government and the Department for International Development to ensure that the vital educational projects that we fund do continue, but without supporting intolerance, prejudice and hatred. Back to Pakistan, where an Ahmadi student may not even make it through education. In 2008, all Ahmadi students were expelled from a medical college in Faisalabad on the basis of their faith, whilst a local newspaper printed the headline, "We shall not allow admission in Rawalpindi Medical College of any student guilty of blasphemy." For these young Ahmadis, their education and their religion cannot coexist side by side. Upon leaving education, discrimination and persecution continues for Ahmadis in Pakistan when it comes to applying for a job. For even the rumour that somebody may be an Ahmadi can destroy their opportunity of employment. For example, the civil and military services have placed restrictions on Ahmadis progressing in senior ranks. Outside of work and education, the persecution of an Ahmadi in Pakistan is allowed to flourish in wider society. For when an Ahmadi applies for a passport, they must state their religion by law. Anyone who self-identifies as a Muslim is required to take an oath declaring Ahmadis as non-Muslim. The reality, therefore, is that no Ahmadi can go to Mecca to perform the Hajj, one of the 5 sacred pillars of Islam. Nowhere else in the world are Muslims required to take such a declaration. How can a state be allowed to impose a religion on its citizens in this way? And for an Ahmadi in Pakistan, their persecution continues when they come to vote. This point is particularly pertinent due to the upcoming elections in the country. For an Ahmadi is prohibited by law to vote as a Muslim. They must either sign a declaration that they are not an Ahmadi or acquiesce to their status as non-Muslim, with a violation of this requirement punishable with imprisonment. This has effectively denied them the right to vote for nearly 40 years. What's more, the separate electoral list for Ahmadis is published and publicly available, enabling extremists to target, intimidate and harass the community. No wonder they face such persecution. And when legislators proposed reforms within the last year that could have changed this, outrage was sparked across Pakistan, prompting senior political and judicial figures to speak out, coupled with a mass violent rally. The reality, therefore, is that time is running out for an Ahmadi to be able to vote in Pakistan this summer.
David.
Isn't this the key point, that Pakistan uses the state, the constitution, the law to persecute the Ahmadis, and that is unique to their level of persecution. With all the horrors we know in Pakistan, the Ahmadi Muslims are singled out by the state and by the constitution, and that is why we should speak out loudly today.
Can I absolutely agree with the honourable member, and can I ask the Minister to take urgent steps to call upon the Government of Pakistan to allow Ahmadis to vote in the upcoming elections without denouncing their faith? After facing a life of hatred, the end of the Ahmadis' life in Pakistan does not necessarily mean the end of persecution, for there are countless examples of Ahmadis being denied the right to burial, with the protesting extremists claiming that they have no right to a burial in a Muslim graveyard. Gravestones have been desecrated and vandalised, whilst there have also been incidents of exhumation of deceased bodies. And if we return briefly to the case of Professor Abdus Salam, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist, the word of Muslim has been erased from his gravestone under a court order. Electoral disenfranchisement, discrimination in law, expulsion by society have left the Ahmadi community in Pakistan voiceless. And so today we must be their voice, for even the constraints of life provide no constraints for the persecution that an Ahmadi in Pakistan may face. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, the persecution is not just found in Pakistan, it's not just found in Algeria and Egypt, and it's not just found in Burundi and Indonesia. It can be found right here in the UK, right here on our doorstep. Over recent weeks, the all-party parliamentary group for the Ahmadi community, which I proudly chair, has been running a 5-part inquiry into the persecution faced by the Ahmadi community. We have heard the testimony of dozens of Ahmadi men and women describing the scale of hatred that they have faced. It is truly shocking to hear. The most stark and the most shocking example in the UK took place just 2 years ago in Glasgow, where Ahmadi shopkeeper Asad Shah was brutally murdered.
Yeah, I thank the honourable friend for giving way, and for me to pay tribute to make an important moving speech that you're doing. Will you join me in paying tribute for Asad Shah, who was stabbed to death outside the shop of Shaw's area in Glasgow in 2016. His death shows we have much to do to raise awareness and increase support for an important minority group. He was a brilliant man, loved by everyone in his community, recognising that the difference between people are vastly outweighed by our similarities. Asad left us a tremendous gift, and we must continue to honour that gift by loving and taking care of each other. We can honour Asad by living in a world of equality, living as one race, the human race. Thank you.
Just help the Chamber 1 second, please. Just to say, normally it is a 15-minute speech, and I'm sure that had been taken into account when it started. Recognising lots of interventions. We have got some time, but I'm sure we will be heading towards the end now. Siobhain McDonagh.
Can I apologise, Mr Deputy Speaker? It's not normally my method to talk for too long, but I thought, given the length of time we had in the debate today... It is. But can I thank everybody for their interventions? Can I completely agree with my honourable friend and say I understand that the 40-year-old was stabbed in his store, sparking an outpouring of grief from locals for a man who was described as a true gentleman with a heart of gold. For during the police investigations, officers established that the incident was religiously prejudiced, and it was a murder that was celebrated by some on social media right here in the UK. The Katmi Nabawat organisation even posted a congratulations message on its Facebook page. This is a violent organisation in Pakistan that regularly calls for the elimination of Ahmadis, but it has branches in the UK and as a registered charity nonetheless. Furthermore, there are reports that Abra al-Haq, an extremely vocal supporter of restrictions on Ahmadis in Pakistan, was allowed into the UK just days ago. Can the Minister establish precisely what measures are being taken to ensure that such hate preachers are not allowed to enter this country so that Asad Shah remains the one and the only Ahmadi to be murdered on our shores? From anti-Ahmadi sermons preached in mosque to posters calling for a boycott of Ahmadi businesses and customers, there is a constant undercurrent of hostility being pushed against the Ahmadi community. The action taken by Ofcom against a variety of television channels in the UK provides further examples of this hate, which, if unchecked, will start spreading to other faith groups as well. One such example was in Waltham Forest in October, when Muslim members of the Waltham Forest Community Forum actively stopped an Ahmadi Muslim being re-elected, stating that he cannot be a representative of Islam. Meanwhile, a former national president of the Ahmadi Muslim Students Association describes how some things have just become routine on campuses across the country. Posters advertising events are torn down, and there are examples of other Muslim societies, either in an overt or covert way, trying to undermine their activities. We return one final time to the case of Nobel Prize winner Professor Abdus Salam. For earlier this month, Oxford University hosted the first UK screening of a film on him. But the university's Pakistan Society has been accused of discrimination due to their reluctance to get involved based on Professor Salam's Ahmadi faith, forcing an apology after an extremely successful event. Such a scourge of extremism is a stain on the freedom of religion we rightly and proudly celebrate in the UK. I'd like to draw my speech to a close by going right back to the very beginning, where I am able to sing the praises of the Ahmadi community in my constituency. Above the front of the Baitul Futu Mosque in Morden hangs a welcome banner that reads, "Love for all, hatred for none." The Ahmadi community in southwest London have raised thousands upon thousands of pounds for good causes, and I am proud that they are a vital part of the fabric of Mitcham and Morden. As their MP, I have a duty to stand up to the persecution that they face. As a chamber, we have a duty to eradicate such persecution from this country. And as a country, we have a duty to press those governments around the world that allow such persecution to flourish.
The question is, as on the order paper, Justine Green.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to the Honourable Lady from Mitcham and Morden for bringing forward this debate today. It's a hugely important one, and she also has a significant community locally, as she set out. I'd like to start by praising her speech as well, which I felt was not only comprehensive but shocking in the details that it brought forward in terms of the persecution suffered by the Ahmadiyya community around the world. For my local community, the Ahmadiyya community plays a key role. It not only had its first mosque built in Southfields, the very first ever mosque actually built anywhere in London in 1926. It's been a home to the community ever since, and I think the role that the community plays more broadly within the Putney, Roehampton, Southfields constituency that I have the privilege to represent is one that I think really is marked out as a role that adds to our community hugely. It was the Ahmadiyya community that got everybody together after the 7/7 bombings many years ago and made sure that we wouldn't be divided by that hatred that led to those attacks. It's the Ahmadiyya community that has a peace symposium every single year and has had one, I think, for 14 years, that gives us an annual chance to come together to talk about the issues that all our communities face. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Youth Association does amazing work around the country, raising money for charities and when we had the floods several years ago, ran towards that and went to visit many local communities, not only nearby perhaps in places like Surrey that were affected, but further afield up in Cumbria to help out with communities affected there. Of course, we've heard of some of the work that Humanity First does, which is transformational work actually around the world. Again, those funds that Humanity First uses, raised by the community and put to good use, helping others far less fortunate. And then, of course, only last weekend, the royal wedding and one of the street parties that I had the chance to go to was in Arnold Crescent in West Hill, organised by local Ahmadiyya residents living there who saw it as a wonderful opportunity for the first time to bring the community together, to celebrate the royal wedding, but as much as anything else, to try and bring together people who lived in that little bit of my constituency who perhaps might not have had the chance to meet one another. This phrase that we've already heard, love for all, hatred for none, really does percolate through every single thing that the community not only stands for, but how they conduct themselves, not only in my local community, but I know around this country and around the world. We've heard something about the persecution that the community faces. I think it's shocking that we've seen some of that right here in the UK itself. We heard about the terrible murder of the Glasgow shopkeeper Asad Shah. For what? For simply apparently wishing his local community a happy Easter. And this was apparently disrespecting of the Muslim faith. What an awful attitude to have towards somebody who was a pillar of the community and someone who clearly played their role every day bringing people together. I draw the House's attention also to some of the quite invidious persecution that happens closer to home. Some of the literature that we know gets put out in places like Tooting, the fact that some of the shops are encouraged not to sell and deal with the Ahmadi community, whether that's selling goods or indeed employing members of the community. This is totally unacceptable on our own doorstep. And whenever I've needed to, I've always raised the issues with our local police, but we certainly shouldn't tolerate persecution happening right in our backyard. I will give way.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for giving way. And indeed, the persecution of the Ahmadiyyas, or indeed any community, is abhorrent. And I think if we are to be true to the principles of humanity, we must stand shoulder to shoulder with that community. And indeed, we need to stand up to discrimination in all its guises. Would the Right Honourable Member agree that the appointment of a UK global ambassador for religious freedom would actually assist in highlighting and tackling the issues that we are discussing today, and indeed as well as helping to fight discrimination and promoting equality?
I think that might well help. I also think it's very helpful that one of our Foreign Office ministers, Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, himself is an Ahmadiyya and therefore, of course, intimately familiar with some of the persecution that's been faced by the community. I think I would draw the House's attention to this excellent report, Ahmadiyyas in Pakistan facing an existential threat. It really does set out quite comprehensively the persecution that happens around the world. I thought the Honourable Lady from Mitcham and Morden did an excellent job of setting out just how many countries persecution happens in. It is absolutely shocking. And only last night, she said, a 500-strong mob attacking a mosque that's been there for 100 years in a part of Punjab in Pakistan. I'd simply finish my comments, because I know others want to come into this debate, by saying this is a country that's always stood up against persecution and always stood for religious freedom. I think the debate that this chamber has is hugely important in setting out our renewed determination to stand up against the persecution. The fact that it is against a community that is really an antithesis of the hatred that so many of those people who carry out the persecution that they have, I think, is the ultimate irony, but I think really sets them apart in so many ways and in a positive way. I'm very proud to have them part of my local community. They've been an intrinsic part for a century now. They will always be hugely welcome. They add to it in a way that's impossible to convey through this short debate today. and I will play my role as a local MP in standing up against the persecution that they face both here in the UK and internationally.
Shrewsbury Davey.
It's a huge pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, and I should apologise for not always notifying her when I go to the mosque in Southfields to meet His Holiness, the spiritual leader of the Ahmadi Muslim community, and indeed others, to talk with them about their issues, but I'm sure she doesn't really mind. I also like to pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, the member for Mitcham and Morden, for her leadership on the APPG. I'm proud to serve as Vice Chair with her, and our inquiry, I think, at the moment is a very, very important piece of work, which I hope the House will have a chance in due course later this year to look at, but also for securing this debate. I don't want to repeat all the warm and correct words that have been spoken already about the role that the Ahmadi Muslim community plays in our country, except to say that in my own constituency, it's been one of the joys getting to know Ahmadi Muslims, learning about their role that they play here in Britain and indeed around the world, of course, in Pakistan, but also seeing how hard they work. I'm always astounded by the discipline, the amount of time they give, particularly to charities and to raising money. And as others said, the amount of money they raise, the sorts of things that they do to help British communities in distress, like during the floods, but also humanity first, with the amazing work they do for some of the poorest in our world. It really is an example of people of faith living that faith in their actions. The persecution that they face, particularly in Pakistan, is quite abhorrent. The way that the law in Pakistan, from the constitutional provisions to the penal code, actually allows state persecution is quite shocking and I think quite unique. And what it says to the people of Pakistan, many of the people of Pakistan, who I'm sure in many ways are extremely religious and good people, but by the state actually putting it into their laws, it gives a green light to awful behaviour. And it means that people who persecute, who attack, who indeed even murder Ahmadi Muslims get away with it. They know they are not going to be prosecuted. They know they are not going to be brought to justice. That means the rule of law does not exist for Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan. And that is what is quite atrocious, and why this country needs to speak loudly and clearly to the government of Pakistan about how this is absolutely unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Honourable Gentleman, I thought the Foreign Office were quite big on this matter and talking about it quite a lot to the government of Pakistan. So this debate will help it, but the government are trying their best at the moment already.
Well, the Honourable Justice White is not having an attack on the Minister in particular, who I think has actually done a good job, and I think it was the Honourable Lady for Putney who mentioned Lord Ahmad, who, both as a Ahmadi Muslim himself, is able to speak with that authority and credibility, and I pay tribute to him. Did the Minister want to intervene? No.
No, never going to miss a chance to have a quick word. May I thank my honourable friend for Beckenham for protecting our interests at the Foreign Office. This is a very, very serious issue. I think all honourable members will appreciate that at times the correct and most effective way to represent interests of any persecuted minority is often in private rather than doing it with megaphone diplomacy. I hope that people will accept that. But there are some very valid points that have been raised already in this debate that I hope to come to when I sum up, and I think particularly in relation to the constitution and penal code that is tightening the rights of minorities in Pakistan.
And the Minister, I'm very helpful intervention actually, because he brings to bear what the real issue is for us debating in this chamber about our request to what the government might do. And I do understand that a lot of these types of issues need to be dealt with in private, and we can take his reassurances, I'm sure, that is happening. And I hope he will focus on the issues of the Constitution, and in particular, as the Honourable Lady for Richmond Morden said, the issues of voting and democracy, because it's quite outrageous that they are prevented from voting in the normal way. I'd also bring to his attention the 3 Ahmadi Muslims who were sentenced to death last year, Mr. Mubashir Ahmed, Mr. Ghulam Ahmed, Mr. Ishan Ahmed, who are on death row now. And I know the government, not just in Pakistan but elsewhere, is very clear on our opposition to capital punishment. But and this is even worse in the sense that it's because of their faith and their beliefs, which is just so abhorrent. So I hope the Minister can indicate in some way that the rights of such people are being looked at. I think we do need to try to understand, both talking to the Muslim community here in the UK and talking to the Pakistan government, how we can reduce this aggressive extremism. This is one of the outlets that we see in Pakistan. We see extremism and its impact in Pakistan and elsewhere through, for example, the Pakistani Taliban. And we need to work out how we can reduce that, because what we've learned already from the inquiry is that this persecution, yes, it is state allowed, state permitted, but it is actually ubiquitous in Pakistani society. And it's that I find most frightening.
Would the Right Honourable Member agree with me? The most frightening thing that's come out of our inquiry to date is that younger people are more anti-Ahmadi in Pakistan than older people. In the West, we always expect the younger to be more liberal. That is not currently the case in Pakistan, and that is very frightening.
I absolutely agree, and it's where I want to push the Minister a little bit more, because while we do accept that sometimes we have to tread quietly on these issues, I am alarmed that the persecution of the Ahmadis there's almost a degree of acceleration in it. The murders, the assaults, the way that we see even from last night, mosques being attacked. There's a concern there that this is becoming endemic and deep-rooted, particularly through the education, the textbooks that children are seeing. And now, I don't want to go too far along this road, but those of us who have had the privilege with the Holocaust Education Trust to visit Auschwitz and learn about the 8 steps to genocide, some of what is happening to the Ahmadi Muslims does ring awful bells. And while we should not throw away that word too freely, I do think maybe the UN Office for Genocide Prevention needs to do a study. We need to make sure that we're not dealing here with just something that comes and goes, but that maybe something that's could have potentially disastrous outcomes. We really need, as a country that I think understands this cross-party, to think quite deeply about this. And I'm not suggesting the government should do this, but I would urge them to consider it. Yes, go quietly, perhaps, but we need to make it clear that we do have teeth as well. So Pakistan enjoys, through the UK and the EU, GSP Plus trade advantages, one of, I think, 10 countries that does. When I was Trade Minister, when I was actually preventing Sri Lanka getting GSP Plus, the reason I campaigned against that was because to get GSP Plus, a country is supposed to uphold UN and ILO agreements and conventions. And I don't think Sri Lanka is in any way doing that in a number of occasions, nor is Pakistan. I mean, if one looks at the UN International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the UN International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the UN Convention concerning discrimination in respect of employment and occupation, it's quite difficult to see that Pakistan is abiding by these things that it's signed up for in the international community with respect to Ahmadi Muslims in its own country. So I do think these things need to be pointed out, because if we're going to have an impact on the government of Pakistan, the way it's behaved, we actually have to show that we are watching them, monitoring them, and not accepting it. There are things, though, that we can do in this country. The Honourable Lady touched on them with respect to some of the hatred that's shown against them. We need the police, local authorities to understand that and to be very strong in preventing that and tackling it when it occurs. But I also think of the Ahmadi Muslim Pakistani people who've fled from Pakistan, who are refugees in refugee camps around the world, and I do not believe we are taking enough of them into this country. I know it's a Home Office issue, but I would ask the Minister if he can confirm that he will go to the Home Office and say, can this country take more Ahmadi Muslims who are sitting in refugee camps, forgotten? Well, let's not forget them. If we're going to take anything from this debate, let's take some small steps that are under our control. And let's revisit the country guidance about how Home Office officials are trained to consider asylum applications for Ahmadi Muslims from Pakistan. Let's make sure that is properly dealt with so people understand what Ahmadi Muslims are having to put up with in Pakistan. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think already we've heard across the House a united approach that we want to come together and say to the government of Pakistan, this is unacceptable, to Ahmadi Muslims here in the UK and around the world, and particularly Pakistan, that we stand with them. We will campaign for their rights and campaign for their right to have religious freedom and basic human rights, and we will not rest until that happens.
Hammond.
Mr Speaker, it's a great pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman, and may I also say the speeches from my Right Honourable friend from Putney and the Honourable Lady, who's almost an Honourable friend from Mitcham and Morden, as we share a border. And in particular, she knows, as she referred to it earlier, the Bat El Fatul Mosque spans our two constituencies. It's where we meet. It's, as she rightly pointed out, the largest in the United Kingdom, and it is rumoured to be the second largest in Europe. And like my Right Honourable friend for Putney and many others in this House, I've been pleased to visit over many years, and of course to visit the mosque in Putney. The Ahmadiyya community were one of the first, when I was first selected as a candidate some 18 years ago now, to come and see me and to say, this is what we're doing in the community, how can we work together? They take part in a number of community events, and I think I just want to stress that right at the beginning before we get on to some of the more details. The work that already has been described in a number of the speeches, but the community litter days, the fact that the Junior Poppy Collection Day, supporting the people who stood up for freedom in this country and the world when it was required in those dark days 70 years ago. They recognise the memory of that, and that is symbolic, I think, for this debate as well to debate. They also, Mr Deputy Speaker, afforded me the most amusing first moment of my year as a Member of Parliament. They have every year a huge jalsana from the community all around the world. In those days it was in Alton, it's now moved to a bigger farm in northwest Hampshire. And my wife said to me as we drove off, you're speaking at this event this afternoon, how many people, have you prepared something? I said, darling, it's a religious ceremony. If we're lucky, it'll be a couple of hundred people. You will imagine my surprise, Mr Deputy Speaker, when I stood up and addressed 30,000 people live and another couple of million on the TV, as they reminded me. So that was a salutary lesson always to try and be prepared when you're standing up to make a speech, wherever you make it. Can I get on to the serious points about today? Because I tried to make an initial serious point about how they are integral to my community and integral to so many members across the House. This is a community that encompasses and epitomises exactly what its slogan is, and they do it in practical ways. Love for all, hatred for none. And we've seen that. And therefore, all of us in this House stand up for the ability to speak freely, to practice freedom of religion, freedom of political expression, and to ensure that people are not allowed to prosecute hate in their speech or in their actions. And quite rightly, in the Honourable Lady's tour around the world, she concentrated on Pakistan, and I think that people are right to do so. But she rightly also pointed out, as the Right Honourable Member has just done, that there are a number of issues that we need to look at. If we espouse these values in this House, we should espouse them in the actions in our country as well. And one or two people have talked about worrying developments in terms of hate preachers coming to the UK and deliberately now infusing some of the other mosques with hate against the Ahmadiyya community. I know from local experience there was a widespread boycott campaign of Ahmadiyya businesses, shops, which was absolutely prosecuted by some of these hate preachers. And the Honourable Lady was right to point out about the television programme in Waltham Forest, but a Radio 4 documentary, Extremism Hidden in Plain Sight, revealed recently that certain Urdu newspapers in the UK, particularly popular amongst elements of the Pakistani community, were running deliberate hate campaigns against the Ahmadiyya community. And so whilst I understand this is a debate about persecution in the world, the Right Honourable Gentleman is right that we hope that in his response today the Minister will recognise that he will speak to Home Office colleagues to make sure that we are doing all that we can to make sure that persecution doesn't happen in this country. And so when we speak with a voice to the outside world, we can speak with a surety that we're acting to drive out that extremism and that hate in this country. I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, it would be unwise of me to do a tour of the world like the Honourable Lady has done. But I did note, but this is widespread. But the point that has been made by both my Right Honourable friend and others is that it is the Pakistan state that puts this into law. Other states allow persecution. Egypt, Kazakhstan are two others that we could name. But the Pakistan state, by actually putting it into law, has made this official persecution. You're not allowed to call yourself a Muslim. You can't refer to your faith as Islam. You can't call your place of worship a mosque. You can't preach or propagate the faith. There is deliberate inequality in opportunity for education and indeed for practicing whatever profession you may wish to do. And so I do think that whilst I absolutely respect the Minister's correct position that much can be achieved by private and methods that are sometimes not public, occasionally it is important also to use the megaphone, to use his analogy. And I do hope, particularly as he will recognise, and several others have quoted examples of this persecution becoming more widespread and more frequent. But can I just put into record what Christian Solidarity Worldwide have said in their conclusion to report on persecution of the Ahmadiyya community? That the mood of aggression by certain Islamist groups towards the Ahmadiyya community shows no sign of improvement. Indeed, the Pakistan government has lacked the political will to make any concession to their community. They go on further that the exclusionary nature of politics has steadily grown since the creation of Pakistan, and that is playing an important role in other states in the world. And so, as the Right Honourable Gentleman said, this is an increasing, not a decreasing problem. And I hope the Minister will be able to say what actions, and I know that one of his fellow Ministers of State has made the point several times at the dispatch box about the number of times we are speaking to the Pakistani government. But I'd be grateful, given it is an increasing nature and is now becoming, as others have said, more or less commonplace and accepted practices in certain countries in the world, that the Minister will be able to say something about what the influence the Foreign Office can exert, both publicly as well as privately. Thank you.
Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is indeed an honour to be able to speak in this important debate today, and to congratulate also my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, for securing this debate and the work that she is doing through the APPG. This debate, as she mentioned, also is taking place during Ramadan, and I do want to pay tribute, Mr Deputy Speaker, to all the Muslim communities in my constituency and across the UK who are observing Ramadan, and to their overall the generosity, compassion and charity, as well as the contribution to our society and our economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, much has already been said in this debate about the kinds of discrimination, the shocking discrimination that Ahmadiyyas are experiencing across the world and not just in Pakistan, but in many other countries, in schooling, in their ability to practice their faith, in participation in work and livelihoods, in civic life. And it is indeed shocking to hear, to read, and to even comprehend. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Ahmadiyya community is held in high regard in our country and across the world. Their contribution to British national life is indeed seen in their ongoing commitment, as has been talked about by other honourable members, to the values of loyalty, freedom and peace. And it is devastating actually to be here debating today the hatred that is being experienced by Ahmadiyyas in so many countries, and indeed in the UK, by a minority who have imported that hate. And it is essential, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that it is understood, that it is challenged, and it is stopped in its tracks in our country by our police, our local authorities, and all of our interfaith communities, and that there is a close relationship that is kept between the local police and Ahmadiyya communities across the country. Last year, I, along with other colleagues from here and the other place, attended the 51st annual convention, the Jalsa Salana, that did indeed have an incredible number of people attending. And I also attended with colleagues and councillors from Hounslow and across the country. And I do want to pay tribute to the work of Councillor Hanif Khan in my constituency, Zahir Khan, and their father, Mr. Abdul Latif Khan, and late mother, who helped build and support the growth of the Ahmadiyya community in Hounslow. The legacy of their work set a tone for how the Ahmadiyya community also extend and play their part in mainstream community life. And that is indeed seen in the over 100 branches that the Ahmadiyya community have in communities across Britain. I've also been privileged to attend Ahmadiyya community events in Parliament, the Peace Symposium, from which I've also learnt a great deal, and events that have brought together leaders from all walks of life to engage in a shared mission for peace, common values and prosperity. The motto, love for all and hatred for none, is one that indeed reaches out and touches the hearts of Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And striking that tone and message of humanity is what many of us will have experienced as well from the Ahmadiyya community. They were indeed quick on the scene and quick to help in moments of need and suffering, such as the attack that took place just here outside Parliament. And they indeed brought people together, as did other Muslim communities and other interfaith communities. And I stood with them on the Westminster Bridge in the aftermath of the terrorist attack, where they brought together young and old and brought together a message of healing and solidarity. I'm proud also of the work of two mosques in my constituency, Betul Wahid in Hanworth and Betul Nur in Hounslow West, which indeed also unceasingly reach out and bring people together to share in their faith and wisdom. And every year the community as well raise hundreds of thousands of pounds for British charities and give hope to many who may never know where that support came from. We know the Ahmadiyya community is continuing to suffer persecution across the world. And I think there's an important message to send from this House today, that we in Britain are on their side and we seek the safety of Ahmadis in every nation across the world. I think what this requires, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I would be grateful for the Minister's response on these points, is joined up action in our own country. Because where we've seen the seeds of hatred and discrimination, which I don't believe is at all representative of the majority in the Muslim community as well, that it is dealt with and that it is rooted out, and that a message is sent that we will not tolerate that hate being imported from other parts of the world, and that we have a joined-up strategy, a national strategy, with our police, our schools, our local authorities, the Home Office and the Foreign Office, because it is going to take a joined-up strategy to tackle this at home as well as abroad. And if the Minister could also respond, Mr Deputy Speaker, as to whether this has been raised by the Foreign Office with the UN, because I do think it is important that where we see hatred in this way, which goes against Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as well, which requires states to guarantee the freedom of religion and belief, that we have a way in which we stand together as nations to root out this hatred and to make sure that Ahmadis are free to practice their religion and their faith in every country across the world.
Paul Scully.
Assalamu alaikum, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's peace be upon you. It's something that's a seemingly inoffensive but very traditional and very heartfelt greeting in all parts of the Islamic world. But as we've heard, the fact that I can say it here, the fact that Ahmadiyya community can say it here in the UK, I can go to Pakistan, and as I do when I go to Bangladesh, and say Assalamu alaikum as a mark of respect to my to Bangladeshi friends and people that I'm meeting for the first time. I could go and do that in Pakistan, but unfortunately the Ahmadiyya community that live there cannot. As we've heard, they can't have a call to prayer, they cannot self-identify as Muslims, and I've spoken in this place a lot about the Rohingya situation, and before last August when the situation exploded and people were pushed out into Bangladesh and persecuted in that way on things that people have described as ethnic conflict. The first identifiable thing that people raised about the taking away of their citizenship of the Rohingya people was their inability to vote. I met the daughter in Burma of a former MP. So not only was he not an MP, he could no longer even vote in his own country. And so you get the sense that that seemingly fundamental and simple right, that when it's taken away, can really risk leading into something so much worse. And we've seen attacks. We've already heard about the attack on the mosque in Sialkot in Punjab, where the 100-year-old mosque was attacked during the night with a violent mob. The house next door was damaged. Local administrators and police and journalists were all at the site when it was going on, but they were just powerless to do anything. They were helpless to do anything, just stood by as spectators, while people were just running around, continuing unabashed with the destruction of the Ahmadiyya property. We've also talked about heard already today, about how that violence and that lack of even any sense that an Ahmadiyya Muslim could be even human, frankly, is in this country with the murder of Assad Shah. The fact that someone actually drove from Bradford to confront a Glaswegian shopkeeper and then stab him on the doorstep of his own shop. How could that even be possibly humane in any one sense? I remember speaking to, I often mention it again, the foreign minister, DFID minister, the member for Central Bedfordshire, when he talked about his experience in the foreign ministry, is when he talks about the fact that when people are effectively considered subhuman, there is no depths to which they won't go to punish them, to hurt them, and to damage them. And I really hope that this is not the thin end of the wedge. That at some point in the future we are not going to see an extension to this persecution to go so much further in terms of the violence that we've seen elsewhere in the world. The thing about the Ahmadi Muslims is that they are fantastic advocates for what's going on around the world. They're a very tight and a very aware community There's an independent charity that had a recent report, I think the last report, which the APPG is doing fantastic work, and I must pay testament to the member for Mitcham and Morden, honourable member for Mitcham and Morden, not only for her speech and for bringing this debate here today, but for the work in leadership. I'm absolutely delighted to be serving alongside her on that important bit of work in particular that we're doing in taking that testament. The last report that I'm aware of that was done in any great length was by the International Human Rights Committee, where a group that specialise in Ahmadiyya affairs. And the forward talked about the systemic nature of their persecution. They're talking about Pakistan's draconian blasphemy laws. Even Prince Charles in there actually in a speech had talked about the fact that the scale of religious persecution around the world in general is not widely appreciated, nor is it limited to Christians in the troubled regions of the Middle East. A recent report suggests that attacks are increasing on Yazidis, Jews, Ahmadis, Baha'is and many other minority faiths. And it is a sense of we must keep having these debates, we must keep these conversations going, because it is so important that we make people aware of what is happening to these people around the world, including in this country. The key findings, some of the key findings of that report were the fact that anti-terror laws are being used in Pakistan, being misused against Ahmadis and other religious minorities. We've heard about the fact that educational texts promote intolerance and hatred, particularly syllabus for religious education, and that nationalised schools and colleges of Ahmadis have still not been returned to the Ahmadi community in accordance with the Pakistan government's policies. And effectively, the constitutional amendment of 1974, designating Ahmadis as non-Muslims, laid the foundation for many, many years of hardship and persecution for this Muslim sect. And then this just really is now entrenched in Pakistan. So we do have to, as the Minister has said, not use megaphone diplomacy, but we must use every lever that we have that these people, this important community around the world, but in particular in their the homeland of Rawab, in particular in Pakistan, that can actually feel free to express themselves and worship in the way, the form that they feel is appropriate. We've heard some of the fantastic things already in the debate about the wonderful things that the Ahmadi community do. I remember going up to Trafalgar Square just after the Westminster attack. First people I saw was the big banner, Love for All, Hatred for None. It was the young Ahmadiyya community that were there right at the forefront, having solidarity with what we'd seen. I'm looking up at the plaque of Jo Cox here, and again, when she was murdered, I know a lot of us felt at probably the lowest point. I certainly felt at the lowest point in my short 3 years of it being in this place. And I took great succour, actually, out of the way that, again, the Ahmadiyya community came together to pay their tributes and to really metaphorically put their arm around us to say, you know, these violent attacks, these violent extreme attacks must have no place in this country or anywhere in the world. And that's really the basis of the annual Peace Symposium that we have at the Battle of Futton Mosque. And actually those peace symposiums are replicated with smaller communities, Ahmadi communities as well. The Sutton Ahmadi community hold a smaller one in my local area, and I'm always pleased to go and listen to what they say, to share messages of peace with my neighbours, frankly. The Ahmadi community were again amongst the first people to be volunteering at Grenfell. They are so aware of what's going on. Going back to the Rohingya situation, and I think the honourable member lady talked about the wonderful work they do raising money for charity. I went to the telethon in the Battle of Futton Mosque where they raised £140,000 in just 4 hours for the Rohingya community in Burma, and that was absolutely testament to it. Just drives them. You've heard a lot today where people are talking about love for all, hatred for none, and if you're just dipping in and out of this debate on television or reading it in the official report, you may think that people are just coming up with a strapline. It's so much more than a strapline. It really does it's all at the beating heart of every single member of the Ahmadiyya community. You do not get extremists in the Ahmadiyya community. It's just so anathema to their very being. And it's interesting that actually Lord Ahmed, who we've heard about today, was actually one of the first ministers looking after the counter-extremism policy. I think that was a perfect choice at the time. So just to conclude, we do, as I say, must make sure that Pakistan does everything it can to tackle the religious zealots within that country, because we've seen in other countries like Saudi Arabia how often government, people and the religious leaders can often work in different speeds. And we must make sure that we can help them effectively all align to say, although they will fundamentally disagree with the beliefs of the Ahmadiyya Muslims, clearly they're going to do that if they believe that Muhammad is the last prophet and the Ahmadis do not. There is no way you're going to reconcile that. But that does not mean the Ahmadiyya Muslims should not be able to celebrate, worship their religion and live in peace.
On break. Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I say what a pleasure it is to follow my neighbour. We don't see eye to eye on many issues, but I think in relation to this we certainly do. I think are both advocates of campaigning against the persecution of the Ahmadi community and indeed religious communities more widely. Can I also thank my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, for bringing this debate to the House, and also for the excellent work that she does in relation to the inquiry that she's conducting and the support she gives to the Ahmadi Muslim community. Now, clearly, unfortunately, religious persecution is a worldwide phenomenon which affects not just the Ahmadi Muslim community. I'm sure many members here will have been contacted by the Baha'i community, for instance, who face very serious persecution in Iran, systematic persecution, whether it's trying to run a business or trying to get education in that country. The fate of Christians, Pakistani Christians, is also one that is of concern, where they suffer persecution there, and to some extent they are also at risk here in terms of people trying to disrupt some of their services in the United Kingdom. We know that the Sunni and Shia in different parts of the Middle East are persecuted by the other camps or the other sect, and the Yazidis in Iraq have suffered genocide at the hands of Daesh. We have the Jehovah's Witnesses who suffer persecution in Russia. And, of course, Jews around the world also face persecution in many parts of the world, and indeed perhaps too close to home here and in Europe. So it's not just, unfortunately, an issue that affects the Ahmadi Muslim community, but obviously I welcome the fact that the debate this afternoon is focused on them. A number of members have referred to the motto, love for all, hatred for none, which they live by. As the member for Sutton and Cheam said, it's not just a motto or a strap line. It's not something that they just put on a leaflet or a website. It's something that they follow and observe in their daily lives. And they are fully engaged in all aspects of UK life. A number of members of Parliament here have referred to the different events that they hold. The Peace Symposium, the Jalsa Salana, an event which also I have attended on a number of occasions, and was, I think, not only surprised at the scale of it in the United Kingdom, but indeed the reach that it had around parts of the world, including, I think, sort of permanent or live coverage for the TV from Ghana, for instance, where they were covering that event. They hold a very successful annual fundraising march, and I suspect that a number of members here have suggested to the community some charities that they should support, and they have indeed done so very generously. I'm very proud that they are able to practice their faith here without any risk or reservations, and that is something that we must ensure continues, because rightly a number of members have pointed out that even in the United Kingdom, with the murder of Assad Shah, there have been issues, as there have by leaflets circulated by an organisation called Khatam Nabuat, who have been circulating leaflets which, frankly, should never have been allowed off the printing press. Now, I hope when the Minister responds that he will be able to say perhaps a little bit about what discussions the government have with social media and Facebook in particular, in terms of we have issues with Facebook not taking down posts quickly enough. Is there evidence, and certainly I think the Ahmadi Muslim community have presented evidence that in fact on social media there are significant issues? Have the government had a dialogue with Facebook and other social media providers about how they tackle these issues and how quickly they tackle them? Ofcom, in the briefing that was supplied, there were some examples where Ofcom have taken action. The most recent one, certainly in the list that we've provided, going back to 2013, but I'd like some assurances from the Minister that Ofcom are indeed properly resourced so that they can look at every single complaint that comes in. Clearly, I accept it's quite difficult for Ofcom to monitor the range of output, given the number of channels that are available, but it's clearly something that they have to keep a close watch on, and I hope that they are properly resourced to do that. So there is a worrying picture, I think, domestically, where we do need to be aware. The police need to be aware, Ofcom need to be aware, the government and social media providers need to be aware, as we do as individual members of Parliament, and not become complacent about our democracy and the ability for people of different faiths to practice their religion here openly and freely. Now, I'll just briefly move on to perhaps the international aspect of this, which many members have focused on as well, starting with Algeria. Now, we were fortunate in getting a meeting with the Algerian ambassador some months ago, and I think it was a very cordial and frank meeting. I think my only concern about it was that there didn't seem to be a recognition that there was actually an issue. And I'm afraid that, I think, to a great extent, and the Honourable Lady for Mitcham Morden may be able to confirm this, the impression we got when we met with the Deputy High Commissioner from Pakistan, there didn't seem to be an acceptance that there was, in fact, an issue for the community. And we were asked to, having read out some quite detailed evidence, were asked to provide more evidence to demonstrate that there was a problem. Well, I think many members today have referred to the problems that exist in Pakistan, and I think there does need to be recognition on the part of the Pakistan High Commission here that there is a problem. So in relation to perhaps the third country which others mentioned is Indonesia. Now, the Christian Solidarity Worldwide provided us all with some very excellent briefings for today, and they have suggested some recommendations for the UK government. I'm not sure whether the Minister received the briefing from CSW, but I will briefly refer to them for him if he didn't. And that was, first of all, in relation to Indonesia, that the government should perhaps be a bit more circumspect when they describe Indonesia as being a role model of tolerance, because the evidence, unfortunately, is that as far as the Ahmadi Muslim community is concerned, that is not necessarily the case. They, as does Pakistan, has the same issue with blasphemy laws. Now, I think as a country we should probably recognise that in fact we only abolished our blasphemy laws 10 years ago, so we haven't exactly done it that long ago ourselves, but we are in a position where we can advocate now that countries abroad should get rid of their blasphemy laws, and Indonesia falls into that category. They passed an anti-Ahmadi Muslim decree in 2008, which I hope the government would push to be repealed. There are various concerns around perhaps the need for them to extend human rights education, including the principles of freedom of religion, a need to promote interfaith dialogue, protect and promote the rule of law, and a request that the government for Indonesia invite the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief to visit the country with unhindered access. So those are some very specific recommendations for the Minister, and if he hasn't in fact had this briefing, I will give it to him at the end of the debate, and he'll have not only what I said on the record but also have the briefing to refer to. And Christian Solidarity Worldwide also flagged up a number of very specific recommendations in relation to Pakistan, and the first one being the repeal of blasphemy laws, the second one being the repeal of Section 298, which is the section which means that Ahmadi Muslims cannot say they are Muslims, either directly or indirectly. evidence that there are prosecutions taking place of those who attack Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan, a need to reform the curriculum. A number of members have referred to this, the issue about textbooks teaching things which are a direct threat to the Ahmadi Muslim community, and I accept that for the UK government is a bit of a dilemma about whether we invest in education in Pakistan or whether we don't. I think on balance it's much better that we do. It's better that the UK government is making that contribution and providing education rather than perhaps relying on religious institutions to do that sometimes, which may promote an agenda which is not favourable towards the Ahmadi Muslim community. Restoring the Ahmadi Muslim schools, something that the Ahmadi Muslim community complied with all the requirements for, I think, as long ago as 12 years, but are still waiting for that to happen. Safeguards, the sort of safeguards that we advocate around the world in terms of safeguards for human rights defenders. Ensuring that no seminary is spreading hate speech or hate material, and encouraging Pakistan to move towards a more democratic and pluralistic society. Well, obviously that's quite a wide request for the UK government, but there are some very specific ones there, which I think, given that the UK government does have a positive relationship with Pakistan, is a contributor in terms of international development funds, has a security relationship with them as well, is in a position to exercise some or exert some leverage. So just to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a very timely debate. I think it's a debate where all members have reflected the very, very significant contribution the Ahmadi Muslim community make to the United Kingdom. We are all very proud of that, and we in this Parliament, on either side of the House, should do everything we can to defend their rights to practice their religion here and indeed to practice their religion abroad.
Zach Goldsmith.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. And I have to start by apologising for having missed the opening speeches. I did indicate to the Speaker that would be necessary, but I'm nevertheless sorry not to have heard the opening remarks from the Honourable Member for Mitcham and Morden, and I congratulate her on securing this vital debate. Also an honour and a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for a wonderful seat, none of whose name I've currently forgotten. That's right, Carshalton, thank you. All of his comments, in fact, are comments which I wholeheartedly endorse. I've been hugely fortunate over the time that I've been an MP, and I have to admit not much before I was elected in 2010, to see firsthand the incredible contribution made to this country by the Ahmadiyya community. We hear all the time, rightly, about the need for better, stronger integration of our diverse communities, and this is at the very heart of the values that run right the way through the Ahmadiyya community. And it angers me that that community has faced and continues to face so much persecution around the world. Their motto, which we've already heard a number of people repeat, love for all, hatred for none, which colleagues will remember was plastered across buses in 2011, paid for, in fact, by the Ahmadiyya community. And it shines out from absolutely everything the Ahmadiyya community does. And colleagues will also remember last year, following those appalling attacks just across the road from here, scenes of Muslim women from London's Ahmadiyya community holding hands in solidarity, in condemnation of the violence that we had seen. I want to highlight very briefly the 10-year partnership between the Royal British Legion and the Ahmadiyyan Muslim Youth Association, an extraordinary organisation which raised over £200,000 for the Poppy Appeal. The same organisation runs blood drives, elderly home visits, feeding the homeless, charity events, green initiatives, and all kinds of green initiatives, peace conferences, interfaith meetings, and so much more than that besides. Last year, like other members here, I had the tremendous honour of being invited to the Jalsa Salana, the annual convention of the Ahmadis, which saw around 35,000 people from all over the world coming together to hear the Ahmadiyya message of unity, understanding and mutual respect. And I left that event, as I know my honourable friends did, with a bounce in my step. I was inspired by the single-minded commitment of absolutely everyone there to peace, to harmony and to decency. And I feel very lucky that we have such a thriving Ahmadiyya community right here in this great city. But despite all this, despite their amazing contribution, wherever they are in the world, the Ahmadiyya community is one of the most persecuted groups of people on earth. And as members will be aware, Pakistan, a country with which I have great and deep familial links and a great love, is tragically at the heart of much of this persecution. Indeed, we heard only last night that a mob of 500 people reported to have attacked a 100-year-old mosque in Punjab. We don't yet know what the cost was in terms of human suffering. In that country, there exists deep structural and institutional prejudice against Ahmadis. And by defining in law that Ahmadis are not Muslims, Pakistan has justified decades of religious persecution against them and denied them anything resembling religious freedom. Those who've killed Ahmadis for their faith are often hailed as heroes. Ahmadi figures from Pakistani culture and history are simply deleted from the school curriculum. And the use of blasphemy laws, as the Honourable Member mentioned in his speech before mine, the use of those laws against Ahmadis can see them imprisoned or even put to death simply for expressing their beliefs. And if anyone is in any doubt, I would recommend that they read a copy of the 2016-2017 report by the Asian Human Rights Commission. It's called Ahmadis in Pakistan Face an Existential Threat. But it's not just Pakistan. In Algeria, Ahmadis have been detained and forced to worship in secret. In Indonesia, a country, by the way, with proud traditions of religious tolerance, government ministers have called for a ban on the Ahmadiyya Muslim faith altogether. But most depressingly, anti-Ahmadi persecution exists in the UK as well. Leaflets have been circulated outside mosques and in universities across the country, calling even for the murder of Ahmadis. And I've seen similar in my own constituency in Kingston a few years ago. And much of it is anonymous, but it's not always anonymous. Extremist clerics have called on fellow Muslims to sever all ties with the Ahmadi community. In 2010, the Imam of the Tooting Islamic Centre demanded a total boycott of Ahmadi-owned businesses. And an organisation called Katme Nabuwat, which has already been mentioned, in Pakistan, incidentally, the same organisation calls for the elimination of Ahmadis. It has offices here in the UK, and the organisation congratulated all Muslims after the murder in 2016 of Ahmadi shopkeeper Ahsan Shah, who was killed for being Ahmadi. And appallingly, that organisation has been an affiliate of the otherwise respected Muslim Council of Britain. I have to say that the MCB have since set up a panel to look at the group. But why on earth do you need a panel when that group has quite openly and brazenly celebrated the murder of people whose version of Islam that they don't like? I think even calling a panel to examine such a phenomenon is an insult. And to add to that insult, two of the members that they put on that panel have strong ties to the very group they're investigating. One of them gave a speech shortly before saying, I quote, having any sort of ties with them, Ahmadis, is far worse than being addicted to drugs and alcohol. I'm humbly requesting you, do not meet them or your faith will suffer from an incurable cancer. Leave this place with the promise that not only will you sever all ties with the Ahmadis, but also with anyone who sympathises with them. Well, that includes, I guess, all of us in this chamber today. So this is not just an international problem. And I do think we need to be much, much tougher on those propagating anti-Ahmadi hatred in the UK. When leaflets are distributed advocating violence or boycotts against the Ahmadis, we all need to speak out as one, more strongly. And law enforcement needs to clamp down on it and pursue those making these threats and incitements in a much more robust manner than we have seen in recent years, as well, of course, as condemning the actions of governments overseas. The UK must use its considerable historical and cultural ties with Pakistan and other nations to call for an end to inhumane laws that criminalise innocent people simply for expressing their beliefs. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community has faced persecution and hate, not with violence, but with extraordinary dignity and extraordinary compassion. And I believe they deserve every single bit of support that we can provide here and abroad. Thank you.
Jim Shannon. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not often speaking on a Thursday afternoon that I realise I've got 2 hours and 40 minutes to speak. I'm joking, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know I haven't. It's only a joke, I'm only joking. For everybody else in the chamber, they're very relieved probably to hear that as well, I suspect, you know. But we have a very serious issue before us. And I just want to, if I can, first of all, commend the Honourable Lady for Mitcham and Morden for her efforts to achieve this debate and for her commitment to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. She introduced this debate with compassion, with deep interest, with feeling, and I think every one of us in this House are indebted to her for setting the scene, and thank you very much for that, because I think it's something that we all appreciate. Just last December of 2017, I attended an interfaith event in Omagh, County Tyrone, which was organised by the Ahmadiyya community, the very community that we're referring to today. I was really pleased to be invited, to be honest with you, because I'd met some of the people here over at some of the events here in the mainland. But they actually put together an interfaith event in Omagh, and to that event they invited Muslims, Sikhs, Protestants, Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many other faiths and beliefs were represented. Many of them travelling from the Republic of Ireland as well, but to share in the positivity of this truly cross-border, cross-community event. Very impressed by the commitment of the Ahmadiyya community there to worshipping in their own way, but also to bring together people from all walks of life, and how great that was to have that in Northern Ireland, and to have probably 120, 130 people from across the community. I believe that we can all learn a lesson from their inspiring example, a salutary lesson for us. I've also been, as an honourable member for Carshalton and Wallington and others have referred to, I'll just say to the honourable member, we may have a very different opinion on Brexit, but I'll tell you something, on this issue, on human rights issues, on persecution, him and I agree on almost everything to the very line and letter, and I commend him for all the hard work that he does as well in this House, as others do. The Jalsa Salana, I've spoken at their events in the last 2 years. I'm very fond of some of the spicy food that they have, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's nice to get away and enjoy those things as well. But also, you cannot ignore or not feel to be touched by the love and warmth that there are at those occasions. I think any of us have been to it will come away with the honourable member who spoke before me said he came away with a warmth and a goodness in his heart. I think we'll all be the same. I was also fortunate enough this week to participate in another excellent event, the Westminster Hall debate on the persecution of Christians. One thing that stands out to me from that debate and this one is that in many countries where Christians are persecuted, Ahmadiyya Muslims and indeed many other religious and belief groups are also persecuted. And as chair of the APPG for freedom of religious belief and also chair of the Pakistan Religious Minorities, I have come to understand that to protect freedom of religious belief for any one group means to protect freedom of religion's belief for all. So it's very clear, when I speak, as I do for the Christian community, I speak for those of other faiths, and indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, those of no faith. And that's what we should all be doing, and I believe that's what we all do. When any one group is persecuted for their beliefs, it's a statement that human rights do not apply to everyone. When such a poisonous thought exists in a society, no one is safe. And I quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who famously said, and his words are important words to be recorded in Hansard and in this chamber, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. No one is free until we are all free." Take those words and think about them and how important they are. They encapsulate this debate and where we are. Therefore, it's vital for people of all faiths and none to follow the example of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and to come together to stand up for the right to freedom of religious or belief for everyone. In that spirit today, I will speak out about the persecution of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Pakistan, and then later about practical steps that Her Majesty's government and indeed the Minister, pleased to see him in his place as always, and know that his response will encapsulate the feeling and the passion and the beliefs and the words and the thoughts of us all in this chamber, and I have absolutely no doubt about that, as indeed will the Shadow Minister as well in her contribution, which she'll make shortly. So to begin with, Pakistan is the only country in the world that officially declares Ahmadis to be non-Muslims in law. Other members have referred to it. The Ahmadiyya community is the most widely, institutionally and constitutionally persecuted religious group in Pakistan, with Ahmadis facing persistent, systematic violence, structural discrimination, which affects our economic, social and employment status, political life and education activities. It affects every facet of their life. In 2017 alone, at least 4 Ahmadi Muslims were murdered for their beliefs, and since the mid-80s, 260 other Ahmadis have met a similar tragic fate. Whenever you go to that Jalsa Salana, they will take you down to one of the exhibitions they have, and you will see those who have lost their lives because of their faith. And that's something I'm always very, very touched on. It's a very poignant occasion. It brings home to me and to all of us, I believe, just what it means to suffer and indeed give your life for your faith. Pakistan Penal Code is used to prevent Ahmadi Muslims from identifying as Muslims, using Islamic terminology, symbols, preaching, disseminating materials in their faith, or referring to their house of worship as mosques. Any of the above is punishable with 3 years imprisonment and a fine. If the offence is regarded as blasphemy, then an Ahmadi could be sentenced to death. How tragic and how wrong that would be. Ahmadis are also technically prohibited from voting because to do so the state requires them to register as non-Muslims, which many refuse to do. Blasphemy laws in Pakistan are disproportionately and unfairly used to target Ahmadi Muslims and other religious or belief minorities, and since 1984 over 300 Ahmadis have been charged with blasphemy under the penal code. And while the Pakistani government may be unwilling to repeal the blasphemy laws, there are many legal and procedural changes that can be made to make sure the law is applied more fairly. The APPG for religious freedom of religious belief, alongside the Humanist and Human Rights APPGs, recently held a roundtable meeting with the FCA Minister Lord Ahmed and the UN Special Rapporteur for freedom of religious belief, which discussed some of these changes. For example, the Pakistani criminal justice system does not currently carry penalties for the false accusations of blasphemy, encouraging allegations based on personal vendettas, enmities or pure and simple hatred for religious or belief minorities. Similarly, the current procedure of allowing the local police, and we've heard some examples of that today, to register blasphemy cases at the behest of any angry individual allows for false or frivolous cases built on the basis of personal animosity. Police stations are easily accessible. Police officers are often happy to register cases without proper investigation, and corruption is unfortunately rampant. If the law was updated to make it an offence to falsely accuse someone of blasphemy, and if that registration procedure was strengthened to require that any complaint for blasphemy must be subjected to a judicial officer rather than a local police officer, this could significantly reduce the amount of blasphemy charges laid at the feet of Ahmadi Muslims and other minority groups. It's important to also mention that the impact of the persecution of Ahmadi Muslims is not limited to Pakistan. The anti-Ahmadi hate is also surfaced in the United Kingdom, as the Honourable Lady referred to in the beginning. The extreme example of the brutal murder of the Glasgow of Ahmadi shopkeeper Asad Shah in 2016, killed for his faith. Other members have referred to calling for members of the Ahmadi Muslim community to be killed, have been repeated in universities, mosques and shopping centres in London. Similarly, a recently broadcast documentary by BBC, Radio 4 Extremism, Hidden in Plain Sight, revealed that the Urdu newspapers in the UK, such as Nawajine and the Daily Asaf, popular amongst some of the British Pakistan community, were running hate campaigns against the Ahmadi Muslim community. This speaks to the point I made earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's what we need to keep to the forefront of our minds. Persecution from one group naturally spreads like a virus that can travel across the world without regard to distance or borders, infecting every society it touches. Therefore, it is vital to tackle this persecution wherever we find it. I believe, and I know that I'm pushing an open door in relation to the Minister, and he knows that, and I say that very genuinely and sincerely to him. And I want to put forward some steps which I believe will be helpful for the Minister and to setting how we can address these issues. I think there's a number of them. The first one is to develop strategies to advance forward in countries with severe freedom of religious belief restrictions. I thank the Minister and his department firstly for their proactive work on this point, and I believe that several country desks within the FCO have already produced such strategies. I would ask that he continue to encourage other desks to do the same, and that he requests that DFID lend their expertise and input into the strategies, as DFID cannot support them or can support them in many ways. For example, it can promote forward through its training programmes and its work in developing education systems that do not discriminate against minority groups, develop a database which tracks quantified data on issues relating to religious belief minorities. This will ensure that government is better equipped to recognise and understand patterns of religious discrimination and to respond effectively to reduce hostility and conflict between groups. This is also vital to ensuring that UK aid is effectively used to support marginalised communities. Increase government expertise, either internally or via external experts, on violence and persecution with religious characteristics and how religion interacts with society and conflict. DFID, for example, has previously expanded its expertise in areas such as gender and preventing sexual violence and conflict. It is vital that the same is done for religion and for religious conflict as government aims to promote stability. We've seen the multi-dimensional phenomenon, but the case of the Rohingya in Myanmar shows just how if I can say this genuinely and sincerely and very gently, unaddressed government and social hostilities and persecution towards religious groups can explode into violence and create humanitarian crises. Fourthly, to introduce mandatory training for FCO and different employees working in countries with severe levels of discrimination of religious or belief groups. This training should focus on the relevant religions, patterns of discrimination and conflict, and how religion and religious actors interact with a specific societal and conflict context. While FCO staff do currently have access to training by the LSE Faith Centre, this training is not mandatory for staff who work in countries with severe freedom of religious belief violations, and it does not necessarily address all the areas that I highlighted. Honourable friends, right honourable friends, to sum up, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community continues to be persecuted for their beliefs, and wherever there is violence and discrimination against Ahmadis for their faith, you can almost be positive that you'll find violence and persecution against many other religious or belief groups. What this teaches us in this House, teaches me, hopefully, and teaches all of us, is that to protect freedom of religious belief for any one group means we protect freedom of religious belief for all. Therefore, it is vital that people of all faiths and none follow the inspiring example of the Ahmadiyya community and come together to stand up for the right to freedom of religion or belief for everyone. And I believe that there are many practical steps that Her Majesty's Government and the Minister and ourselves in this House can take to increase its capacity to do this. It can develop strategies to advance freedom of religious belief in countries with severe freedom of religious belief restrictions. Develop a database which tracks quantitative data on issues relating to religious and belief minorities. Increase government expertise on violence and persecution with religious characteristics. Introduce mandatory training for FCO and different employees working in countries with severe levels of discrimination of religious belief groups. Through taking these steps, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government can dramatically improve its capacity to promote freedom of religious belief, to guarantee the fundamental rights of Ahmadi Muslims and other groups across the world. I'd like to sincerely thank the Minister for his hard work in this area. We're deeply indebted to him for that, and I encourage him to give serious consideration to these recommendations. I look forward very much to hearing his remarks. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Patrick Grady. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Assalamu alaikum. And I want to join, as others have done, in sending best wishes to all of those around the world observing Ramadan. As someone who struggles to observe Lent on an annual basis, I think Ramadan is an even stricter discipline, and people's commitment to observing that is something we can all learn from. I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Mitcham and Morden on securing this debate, and the Backbench Committee for granting the significant length of time that we have had. And everyone, I think, who's spoken have made very heartfelt, very personal contributions, and there's a very clear consensus across the Chamber about the disgraceful nature of the persecution faced by the Ahmadiyya community, and I hope we hear some positive responses from the Government. I also pay tribute to the various all-party groups that work on this, some of which are represented today, and the various organisations that have provided us with background and briefings, not least the Ahmadi community themselves, Christian Solidarity, Worldwide and others. And I join the tributes. I'll say a little bit more, but at the start I just want to say I join the tributes that were paid to Assad Shah, and I think it's very fitting that dreadful outrage is specifically mentioned in the motion as one of the most terrible examples of persecution that we have seen. The SNP, of course, are utterly opposed to religious persecution. Religious freedom is a fundamental human right, and it should be respected all around the world. We're deeply disappointed that the Pakistani government continues to condone and indeed oversee some of the conduct of religiously motivated attacks, and we call upon the Foreign Secretary to press the Pakistani government to take action against such religious persecution. Reform of blasphemy laws, this has been touched on, is absolutely vital. Blasphemy laws are incompatible with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Pakistan has committed to. And as we've heard throughout this debate, it's quite alarming that there appears to be growing persecution of the Ahmadi community here in the United Kingdom, especially given the valuable contributions that the community make to wider society and in our constituencies. So I want to reflect on those points over the short time available. At the end of April, Pakistan's Ahmadi community released a report detailing the growing hostilities that the community is facing, including all the different things that we've heard of in this debate: indiscriminate arrests, impediments from voting in general elections, and the various other discriminations that we have heard. And that's why, as I said, it is absolutely vital that there is reform of the blasphemy law, both in Pakistan and in other countries around the world that continue to keep such laws on their statute books. In Pakistan, blasphemy against any recognised religion is illegal, with penalties from fine to death, and anyone can file a blasphemy case claiming their religious freedoms are injured for any reason. But then this is what is exactly being applied to the Ahmadi community by their faith not being recognised as a religion. And a blasphemy law by itself then is bad for freedom of speech. And blasphemy laws which then actively ban another religion by name, I think are really quite exceptional and really a matter of serious concern. And then we hear, and we've heard throughout this debate, the impact of that, of killings, of murders, of attacks, of exclusions from schools and from other aspects of civil society. And sadly, this is something that has gone on for decades, dating back to at least the amendments to the Constitution that were made and further. And something that I heard, which I was sort of particularly taken aback about, was that in order to apply for a Pakistani passport, Pakistanis are required to sign a declaration that they consider Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to be an impostor prophet and consider his followers to be non-Muslims. And that is quite an astonishing thing for any holder of a religious belief to be asked. It's not, the theological and religious parallels are not identical, but to me it seems it's the equivalent as if I was asked to sign a document not recognising the authority of the Pope within the Catholic Church. And that would just be astonishing. I mean, that, you know, it's very difficult to comprehend, although, as the member for Carshalton and Wallington said, it's not that long since we have had blasphemy laws taken away, and there was a form of religious persecution or religious discrimination in this country for many years, but we have moved beyond that, and we have to continue to hope that we can encourage other countries to do the same, because as others have said in the debate, once we start to see some form of state-sponsored discrimination against any minority or particular community or faith group, there's a very real risk that that becomes the thin end of the wedge, and that experience and persecution begins to be felt by other minority groups, or indeed anyone that doesn't subscribe to the position being put forward by the state. And as we've heard again from members across the House, while some of the worst and most concentrated abuse of the Ahmadi is taking place in Pakistan, there is growing persecution around the world. We've heard particularly stark examples from Indonesia, but we know also in Bangladesh and Belarus and various other parts of the world, we see the same kind of thing: people being targeted for their beliefs, people being attacked, people being murdered, and none of that is acceptable and has to be called out. And again, I understand that Ahmadis are in fact officially banned from entering Saudi Arabia and performing the Hajj pilgrimage. And again, I encourage members to consider what the equivalent for members of different Christian denominations would be if they were suddenly being told they couldn't visit Rome, or they couldn't visit the holy places in the Middle East, in Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Nazareth and so on. What kind of a message would that send? And we have to think about how that reality is experienced by the people affected. And we have sadly seen this persecution in our own doorstep, and a number of members from Scotland earlier spoke about the experience of Asad Shah, as have others who have contributed to the whole debate. And I was the Right Honourable Member for Putney, in fact, made the very true point that the root of that attack appears to have been because he was wishing his Christian customers, and indeed I think his customers more generally, a happy Easter. That they were living out, as the member for Sutton and Cheam has said, they were living out that love for all and hatred for none. And yet that was one of the motivating factors in the murder of Mr Shah. But what I think is, if there's anything to be taken from that, anything positive to be taken from that, it's the way that the community united in support of the Ahmadis in Glasgow and against the kind of extremism that was displayed by that attack. There was an interfaith campaign, united against extremism, buses with posters spreading a message of tolerance that were paid for by the different religious communities and supported by politicians and civil society across the board. The First Minister herself was one of several politicians who attended and one of hundreds of people who attended the vigil that was held. Ahmad Oswu Kundanu, who's one of the leaders of the Ahmadi community in Glasgow, and who I know very well. I think every MP in Glasgow has got to know him over the last few years since we've all been elected. Called on all Muslims to condemn the killing of Shah, and he said that the message of intolerance that was spreading was unacceptable. He and others invited the First Minister to a peace symposium in their mosque, which is in the constituency of my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow Central. And she said at that meeting in December that the peace symposium that they held demonstrates the commitment of the Ahmadiyya community to promoting the values of peace, tolerance and understanding, and it's an important opportunity for all of us to restate our shared values and our shared aims. And following that incident, the Scottish Government launched a review of the suite of laws covering hate crime offences in Scotland to ensure it remains fit for purpose in the 21st century. And the Minister for Community Safety, Annabel Ewing, in launching that review in January of last year, said, "Racism, intolerance and prejudice of all kinds are a constant threat to society, and while Scotland is an open and inclusive nation, we are not immune to that threat." And that is absolutely correct. We have to have constant vigilance. And we've heard again from members across the Chamber of other incidents across the United Kingdom of intolerance and bigotry being directed towards the Ahmadi community. The very worrying, the member for Richmond Park, I think, spoke about the distribution of leaflets at universities calling for attacks on members of the Ahmadi community. And in May 2018, as we heard, there's been the issues at Oxford University. And all of that, I think, is very concerning indeed. So, as I say, we are disappointed, deeply disappointed, that the Pakistani government continues to condone and oversee the conduct of religiously motivated attacks. And we call upon the Foreign Secretary and the Ministers to press the Pakistani government to take action against religious persecution. It was in 2013 that the Foreign Office first listed Pakistan as a country of concern over its human rights record, and that was particularly down to its record on freedom of religion and belief. So an update from the Minister now on how it is acting on this, what representations it continues to make through diplomatic channels, I think will be very welcome. What discussions are taking place at a global level through the United Nations and other forums on persecution in the Middle East and other Muslim majority countries. And various members made points that I think it would be important to hear a response from the Minister for. And the concept, the member for Slough, who's not longer in his place, but he suggested the idea of a global ambassador for religious freedom, and I believe an equivalent has been appointed in the United States. The support for refugees that the member for Kingston and Surbiton raised, I think, is absolutely vital. We must show ourselves welcoming and be willing to offer refuge to people who are fleeing persecution and hostility. And some of the other recommendations that have been made by Christian Solidarity worldwide and others that the member for Carshalton and Wallington spoke about action that can be taken in Indonesia and elsewhere, I think it would be helpful to hear. And the monitoring of rising violence in the UK and what steps are being taken to tackle this and promote solidarity with the community, and what steps the government is willing to take to work with the devolved administrations in promoting that kind of tolerance, I think would be useful as well. So I just want to reflect, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, as others have, on the contribution that these communities make to each of our own constituencies. And I have had the pleasure of interacting with Glasgow's Ahmadi community since the election in 2015. And indeed, we were paying tribute to former members earlier on, and I think it's right to pay tribute to the former member for Rutherglen, Margaret Ferrier, who, even since the election, has continued to be a champion for the Ahmadi community and standing in solidarity with them, supporting their campaigns, attending their events. And I know she contributed very much to the all-party group when she was here, and indeed to similar debates in the Chamber. But the community in Glasgow, much as the other communities that we've heard here, respond incredibly in spite of and in the face of violence and persecution. They respond, as the member for Sutton in particular said, they respond with peace and love and tolerance and active involvement in their community, showing what a positive contribution can be made, whether that's the fun run that they organise annually in Glasgow. The funding often goes to the Children's Hospital in Glasgow, litter picks, making their space, their mosque available for wider community events, the peace symposiums, many of which I've had the privilege of attending, and indeed, as the member for Strangford said, you're always guaranteed a memorable catering experience as well when you take part. And so, as I say, that experience just stands in such stark and welcome contrast to the violence and persecution that the community is experiencing, sadly here in the UK and indeed around the world. So, as others have reflected, that love for all, hatred for none is not simply a slogan. It's a way of being. It's a philosophy that permeates every aspect of the community's lives, and it reflects the golden rule that we hear in other religions as well: to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think governments that seek to persecute minorities ought to reflect on that, especially if they're doing so in the name of a religion themselves, because there is not a single global religion that, in its purest form, condones or accepts the kind of violence and persecution that we're seeing. Tolerance has to be absolutely key. And we must speak out because, as others have said, if we allow blasphemy laws, if we allow persecution, if we allow intolerance towards one set of minorities, then the risk is that other minorities, and indeed larger and larger groups, can become affected as well, and the risk of growing persecution of others and growing intolerance of all kinds. And that is what we must unite against, and that, I think, is what this debate has shown today. Thank you.
Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Glasgow North. And this afternoon we've heard some excellent speeches and interventions. It's a very important debate, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, and the chair of the APPG, speaking so eloquently on behalf of the Ahmadi Muslim community in her constituency, and also for very skillfully taking us on a global tour and showing us the truly dreadful extent of the persecution suffered by Ahmadi Muslims worldwide. We had an intervention from my honourable friend, the member for Stretford and Urmston, who highlighted the hospitality which was offered in Manchester following the attack last year by the Ahmadi Muslim community. The honourable members for Crawley, Scunthorpe and Richmond Park, amongst many others, recorded the contribution that the Ahmadi Muslims make to our national life and to their constituencies, and like many members who've spoken this afternoon, quoted love for all, hatred for none. And I think that is something we will all go away with this afternoon. The honourable member for Feltham and Heston talked about the charitable endeavours of the charity Humanity First, and again the contribution of Ahmadis to our national life. The honourable member for Slough talked about the situation in Indonesia and quoted an incident of a mob attacking several homes and attempting to expel Ahmadis, actually in the presence of police officers. The murder of the newsagent in Glasgow, Assad Shah, was highlighted by the members for Glasgow North East and the member for Coatbridge, Christon and Bells Hill, who both paid tribute to Mr Assad Shah and said that we need to do much to deal with the prejudice here in this country. The honourable members for Carshalton and Wallington and Sutton and Cheam highlighted the restrictions on Ahmadis on even using traditional greetings, and the honourable member for Carshalton also highlighted the problems of online hatred being spread on sites like Facebook. The honourable member for Worley talked about the contribution of Ahmadis in business, commerce and community affairs, and asked for the authorities to crack down on the discrimination that goes on in this country. The honourable member for Kingston and Surbiton made the important point that Pakistan uses the state and the law to persecute Ahmadis. And he also highlighted the case of the 3 Ahmadi Muslims who are still on death row, and the Minister knows that I have written to him about this case. The honourable members for Putney and Wimbledon talked about the Ahmadi Peace Symposium, which is held every year, and the great work done by the Ahmadi people in bringing communities together. And the honourable member for Strangford, the chair of the APPG on religious belief, highlighted the very important point that freedom of religious belief and thought must apply to all, those of all faiths and those of none. So this motion today notes the rising tide of persecution of Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan, Algeria and in other countries. It also notes the effect that hate preachers have on radicalising people internationally and in the UK, and highlights the past activities of hate preacher Syed Muzaffar Shah Qadri, the Pakistan Muslim cleric who has been banned from preaching in Pakistan because his sermons are considered too incendiary. And he is held responsible for radicalising Tanveer Ahmed, the murderer of Mr Asad Shah. And as has been mentioned by several members here today, Mr Shah was apparently targeted after messages he put out on social media, including an Easter greeting to Christians. And this was highlighted by the Honourable Member for Putney, as well as the Honourable Member for Glasgow North. The Honourable Member for Putney also brought attention to the excellent report from the International Human Rights Committee and the Asian Human Rights Committee entitled Ahmadis in Pakistan Face an Existential Threat, and I would recommend that to anybody here who hasn't read it. It's an excellent report. The motion also calls on the government to make representations to the governments of Pakistan and Algeria on the persecution of Ahmadis, and to make more stringent the entry clearance procedures to the UK for hate preachers by ensuring that entry clearance hubs and the Home Office have adequate numbers of Urdu speakers to monitor visa applications and online radicalisation. Now, as we've heard today, Ahmadis believe that they are Muslims, and yet in 1974 the National Assembly of Pakistan declared them to be non-Muslims, and this was done by passing the Second Amendment to the Constitution of Pakistan, declaring Ahmadis to be non-Muslim despite their own belief and thought. Pakistan's blasphemy laws remain a key area of concern. These legal provisions, which criminalise insults against Islam, are often misused to settle personal scores, and Ahmadis continue to face blasphemy allegations. Ahmadis cannot defend themselves against charges of blasphemy without committing blasphemy and placing themselves in acute legal, physical and social jeopardy. Ahmadis who voice opposition to legislation making their religion a crime are considered traitors. The International Court of Justice has found systemic and widespread fair trial violations related particularly to Ahmadis accused of blasphemy violations. And under Pakistan's election law, Ahmadis are effectively denied the right to vote, and they are disenfranchised unless they declare themselves as non-Muslims, effectively giving up their faith. The Electoral Commission of Pakistan has decided that Ahmadis can be permitted to vote only under a separate register and by self-identifying as a non-Muslim minority. This requirement to deny their faith in order to vote has caused their disenfranchisement from politics for more than 30 years. And worse still, the separate Ahmadi electoral register is publicly available, making it much easier for extremists to target Ahmadis. The US Commission on International Religious Freedom identifies Pakistan as a country of particular concern, and their 2017 annual report states, and I quote, Ahmadis are subject to severe legal restrictions and suffer from officially sanctioned discrimination. The Second Amendment declares Ahmadis to be non-Muslims. Penal Code Section 298 makes it criminal for Ahmadis to refer to themselves as Muslims, preach, propagate or disseminate materials on their faith, or refer to their houses of worship as mosques. They are also prohibited from voting. Ahmadis frequently face societal discrimination, harassment and physical attacks, sometimes resulting in murder. And I want to mention here the discrimination faced by Ahmadi women who live in a patriarchal society and, as well as facing similar levels of harassment as Ahmadi men, can become socially isolated, facing overt discrimination during routine activities like shopping or going to the market. Some shops display signs and banners that say we do not deal with Qadianis, the pejorative term used to refer to Ahmadi Muslims. The term originates from Qadian, a small town in northern India, which was the birthplace of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement. Many Ahmadis leave Pakistan to seek refuge elsewhere, seeking a safe haven where they can freely practice their religion and live a normal and peaceful life. And many, as we have heard today, have fled to countries such as Sri Lanka, Malaysia and Thailand, where they may end up in refugee camps or in prison and denied access to health, education and work. And we've also heard today that discrimination against Ahmadis is not confined to Pakistan, and my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, took us on a comprehensive global tour. Human Rights Watch report that in Algeria, whose Ahmadi minority amounts to around 2,000 people, around 280 had faced criminal trials in 2016 for denigrating tenets of the Islamic faith or taking part in unauthorised association. Algeria's Religious Affairs Minister, Mohamed Aissa, has made disparaging remarks about Ahmadis, stating that they are not Muslims and suggesting that the community is part of a wider Israeli conspiracy to destabilise the country. In Indonesia, Ahmadis were declared deviant by that country's top Islamic body in 2008. Ahmadi leaders complain of intimidation since 2005 and that their prayers and activities have been banned in many districts. In February 2011, 20 Ahmadis were attacked on the Java Peninsula by about 1,500 radicals. 3 members died and 5 were severely injured. In Egypt, the Interior Minister has issued orders for the arrest of 25 innocent Ahmadi Muslim men and women. In Burundi, the Secret Service raided the Ahmadi Mosque in Bujumbura city and arrested 13 children and youths who were attending a religious education class, and these children were arrested on alleged charges of terrorism. Now, Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares the right to freedom of thought and religion. Countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, Algeria, Egypt, Burundi and others, in their persecution of Ahmadi Muslims, are denying their citizens that universal right. And yet, Pakistan's founder, Ali Jinnah, expressed a clear commitment to defend religious freedom when he said, and I quote, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or to any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion, caste or creed." And it is time for Pakistan to return to this vision. And it is time for the UK and our international partners to work more effectively and consistently to secure the rights of the Ahmadi community across the world. And whilst I appreciate that the more sensitive details may not be made public, we can and must clearly condemn the persecution of Ahmadi Muslims. And I would like to just finish by posing a few questions to the Minister. Will the Minister call upon the Governor of Pakistan to pay particular attention to the findings of the International Court of Justice and to call for processes to ensure that Pakistan judicial processes deliver fair trials for Ahmadis and for other persecuted groups? Will the Minister also call upon the Government of Pakistan to order the immediate release of all Ahmadis on death row and those held in prison? Will the Minister urge the Government of Pakistan to repeal its anti-Ahmadi and blasphemy laws, which are the basis for the persecution of Ahmadi Muslims? And finally, will the Minister call upon all Member States where Ahmadis are living in diaspora to ensure compliance with the UN conventions, to ensure that the UNHCR completes its due process?
Minister Mr Markfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for Mitcham and Morden for securing this important debate. May I pay a very heartfelt tribute to her work as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and that all she has done to support the community both here in the UK and overseas. And may I also say that gratitude extends to the contributions of other honourable members, and I shall try to respond, if I may, to all the points that have been raised. I notice there is a bit of a South London mafia in the House this afternoon, but I do appreciate, for good reason, why that is the case, as someone who has the misfortune of being just the other side of the river with his constituency. But when, in a previous life as the Shadow Minister for London before the 2005 election, I came out and saw the mosque and indeed was able to meet many leading members in the London Ahmadiyya community. Now, it was, as the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford rightly pointed out, only 2 days ago that I addressed the House in another debate about Christian persecution. On that occasion, members across the House gave horrifying accounts of the suffering of Christians in the Middle East, in North and West Africa. Today, we have heard similarly appalling descriptions of the discrimination suffered by Ahmadi Muslims. I suppose I just wanted to say this one thing. This has been a very heartfelt debate, a very calm debate. And whilst it is calm, I hope that the world outside, and in particular a number of the countries that have been mentioned today who clearly do discriminate against Ahmadi populations, do not think that calm doesn't underpin a certain amount of anger, real sense of mission that I think many of us will try to have in this regard, because the plight of the most peaceable of communities is something that should certainly hit all of our hearts, but it's something that I hope that we can continue to work consistently and persistently in relation. And I know that whilst honourable members have focused their concerns on events in Pakistan and Algeria in particular, but lest there is any complacency, we must also accept, as has been pointed out, that the UK is not immune from the scourge of religious intolerance. So I take this opportunity on behalf of the government to extend my very personal condolences to the family of Asad Shah from Glasgow and to members of the Ahmadi Muslim community. I know that the Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, wrote to representatives of that community to express the government's condolences and solidarity. And we also took the opportunity then to meet representatives of the community to hear firsthand of the issues faced in their day-to-day lives. But I do understand the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman for Kingston Surbiton had to say. There's a great worry that in the world at large, minorities are getting increasingly undermined, and we need to recognise that we have to stand up for this. The issue of extremism in our own society is something that the government will continue to challenge. We all know that our country is built on values such as democracy, respect and tolerance. Values that, again, I was rightly reminded by the Honourable Gentleman Carshalton and Wallington, Right Honourable Gentleman, who rightly pointed out that we've had our own blasphemy laws on the statute book. Perhaps they were laws that were not going to be pursued, but nonetheless the fact that they were on the statute book until barely a decade ago reflects that there has been change in our own society, quite significant change in the decades and centuries that have gone by. I know I speak, I think, for everyone in this House when I say that we do not believe it is acceptable for any organisation or individual in this country to promote hatred or to condone violence, particularly in social media, and I will come on to that in a moment or two. Where messages are posted in this country that incite hatred and murder, they should be reported to the police, and such activity is criminal and will not be tolerated. As far as legislation is concerned, again, comes back to a point that was made by the Right Honourable Gentleman for Kingston and Surbiton. I know that this is something that is under active review. He will also know, and he will appreciate, as we all do, the issues and the balance between the freedom of speech and ensuring that there is safety in this regard is a very delicate issue. We need to recognise also that many of the global internet service providers are precisely that. They are global organisations, and of course the internet itself in a very positive way, is a global resource, and therefore we need to ensure that we are able to work with other countries to try to get some global protocols. This will, I think, be a major challenge in the decades to come. As I said on Tuesday, all religious persecution, in whatever form it manifests itself, is abhorrent and deplorable. Governments, religious groups, and right-minded people must both condemn these incidents wherever they occur and do everything they can to bring it to an end. And that's why we will continue to work tirelessly to promote and defend the rights of people of all faiths and none all around the world, so that they can practice their faith or belief without fear or discrimination. Now, I tried to explain our approach to defending freedom of religion or belief internationally in some detail on Tuesday, so I won't rehearse the same points today, but I would like to address some very specific issues raised in the motion, which, if I may say, was extremely comprehensive, about the prosecution of Ahmadi Muslims overseas and on UK policy on counter-extremism. I'm going to be travelling to Indonesia in August, and I am very happy to ensure that the very specific points made by the Honourable Lady will be brought up in the context of that visit. I have had visits and will have future visits to Sri Lanka, Malaysia and Thailand, and again, the specifics and the concerns raised here will be brought up. The Honourable Lady did bring up the issue of DFID in relation to textbooks. I do believe it is not correct that we fund biased textbooks, but I will look into this issue, and if she will forgive me, I shall write to her in due course. I wanted to say a little bit, if I may, because she also brought up the issue about entry clearance and the processes that we focus upon, and I know that a number of other members also had some concerns on this. Ministers of religion and religious workers are able to come to the UK through one of two routes, either Tier 2 as a Minister of Religion for longer-term postings, or Tier 5 as a religious worker for temporary positions of up to 2 years. These routes cover coming to preach, to carry out pastoral duties, to work as a missionary, or to be part of a religious order and other religious duties. Both visa routes sit under the points-based system and require a certificate of sponsorship from a licensed sponsor. In October of 2013, and I will say this, I think it's important that this debate is looked at in context. Whilst there was a relatively recent change, as I say, as recently as 4.5 years ago, we have to keep this under constant review, given the circumstances that have been raised in this debate. But in October 2013, the government introduced a genuineness test to better identify those who may be trying to abuse either of these routes. This test applies to applications under the points-based system and is part of a wider policy of assessing the credibility of visa applicants. I am worried, I'll be honest, I'm worried, and ultimately this is a Home Office matter rather than a Foreign Office matter, but we will try as far as possible to have as joined up an approach to government as we can. But I am concerned that essentially the system is being played to a certain extent, and there are people who would be on dark lists, even in their own home countries, as being those who would incite religious hatred, who are able to come to this country and able, as I say, through the rules that we have in place, are able to come here and then utilise being based in the UK to preach against Ahmadis in particular. We will do all that we can. Obviously, the fact we've had this debate is, I think, useful. It perhaps is something that many my Home Office colleagues will need to work more closely on, but I will ensure, and I give my pledge to the Honourable Lady and indeed all members here, that we will try and address this issue between us and the Home Office to ensure that some of the abuses are not continued. My right honourable friend for Putney, I think, spoke about a number of issues that I will come on to in my speech. She also raised the issue of having a freedom of religious belief special envoy. This, I think, is something that is almost literally sitting on the desk at number 10 Downing Street at the moment. I think this is something that we have work in progress, and I think it is something we would want to emulate the US model that was referred to by the Honourable Gentleman for Glasgow North. My honourable friend for Wimbledon is a very close and long-standing friend of mine, and I fear, one slight matter of fact, it is indeed 19 rather than 18 years ago since his selection as the candidate. I only know that because we are such good friends that we had a celebratory dinner with our wives within a matter of a few days of that particular event. But I will speak to the Home Office about domestic persecution-related issues. He's not here today. At the moment, I understand he's had another pressing meeting that he was going to go to, but I'm sure he will read Hansard very avidly. He touched on an issue that again came up with a number of others about the issue of hate preachers. And whilst the official line again is the government takes a robust stance against individuals whose presence in this country might not be conducive to the public good, I recognise that there is now a much more deep-seated concern in the public that, again, that test, rather a vague test as it is not necessarily capturing some people who really should not be in this country. And part of the difficulty I fear with such a test is that if there is a big hue and cry in the media, or indeed the social media, then we highlight particular individuals, and I suspect it is probably the case that the Ahmadi community, by its nature, isn't as organised on the social media to be able to start a big campaign to stop individuals coming into this country. So I think we will need to look at cases, obviously, on an individual basis, particularly those that are brought to our attention. But I share, I think, with many members in this House, I'm not convinced that we've got this absolutely right. We are going to need to tighten up and try and have a more robust test to ensure that those who would do harm, who would wish to incite religious and other division, are not allowed into this country. Again, this is ultimately a Home Office-related matter, and it would be wrong of me to be overly prescriptive at this stage. I wanted, if I may, to touch on something else that the Right Honourable Gentleman for Kingston and Surbiton raised about GSP+. He will know that the EU has such reports, indeed reported most recently in January of this year, and made a number of recommendations specifically to Pakistan, amongst other countries being addressed. With our European Union partners, we will continue to press Pakistan in that regard. He also made some rather thoughtful points. I think he recognised that this wasn't necessarily a place for immediate action, because one of the difficulties with putting countries onto a blacklist or taking them off a blacklist is that it becomes quite difficult to move away from inertia and not have therefore having a list of priorities of what have to be done. And there can be dangers in going down that route. I certainly think it is important we work with international partners, whether within the EU or in the time to come within the broader international community. But I think he makes a very fair point, and I will take this opportunity to revisit precisely where we were with GSP+. He's quite right that obviously in relation to Sri Lanka at the time when he was a minister, quite rightly he made he stood up at a time when the Sri Lankan government was making international commitments, too many of which have not been fully and properly adhered to, and he will also recognise that there is a need and a desire at all times to bring countries within the international community to try and work together, and trade and commerce is one aspect of that. It must not be an overriding aspect, but it is an aspect that obviously has a part to play in bringing countries back into the international community going forward. These are complex issues, and I'm very happy to take them up very directly with him, and I'm obviously interested to learn more about his own experience in this regard, particularly as, of course, as he is well aware, Sri Lanka is another country that I have responsibility for within the Foreign Office. We're also aware of a number of reports of Ahmadi Muslims being arrested in Algeria. The government in Algiers states that these arrests relate to the breaches of law applicable to all religions. However, it is also the case that while the Algerian constitution provides for freedom of religion, it is not always compatible with the domestic law that has come into play. We shall continue to raise our concerns with the government of Algeria and urge them to rectify this anomaly and to respect the right of freedom of religion or belief. Last October, my own colleague, the Minister for Human Rights, Lord Ahmad, himself has been reminded, an Ahmadi Muslim and a man of deep faith, discussed the plight of the Ahmadiyya with the Algerian Minister for Religious Affairs, and I know that our ambassador has also raised issues with him at the beginning of this year. I should point out that we also have great concerns about the treatment of the Protestant Christian community in Algeria, and we know, for example, the number of churches have been closed. We have raised this at various levels with the Algerian government, and our embassy keeps in close contact with the Protestant Church there. Our ambassador met representatives of the Church as recently as last month. Now, many members rightly have raised the issue of Pakistan. This, I think, debate is particularly timely as it comes, as has been pointed out, on the morning after a brutal mob attack on a historic 100-year-old mosque in the Punjab. Let me say, we strongly condemn these continuing attacks on this peaceful community. This attack serves as an unwelcome reminder of the seriousness of the issue, and I have tweeted my own condemnation of the mob attack earlier today. I wanted to say a little bit about the relationship with Pakistan. We have a tremendous High Commissioner out there, Tom Drew, and his team, who do a lot of work, very challenging work in relation to counter-terrorism, in relation to a huge number of consular issues. Obviously, we have the biggest single DFID programme out there. There's a way of trying to work again with British Pakistanis to try and develop some trade connections going forward. All of this is a huge amount of work, and that is not in any way to downgrade the work that we do standing up for the Ahmadi community. But I will take this opportunity to ensure that we do raise it to a greater degree. I mean, I've been out to Pakistan once as a minister. I'm going out later this year. And I hope that the House will recognise that, and I feel to a certain extent that we are perhaps not doing enough, and it's not that that we are ignoring the plight of freedom of religious belief, but there is such a huge agenda, not least given the importance of Pakistan, with Afghanistan as a neighbour on the one side, its relationship with China, the sense in which the United Kingdom is a trusted partner in what is an uncertain world in that part of the globe. But I do accept that perhaps we do need to do a little more indeed publicly as well. It was raised by a number of members here, and I didn't wish to suggest that because we tend to deal with these issues privately and quietly, and we do very persistently with all of our counterparts, but there is an opportunity, I think, perhaps at times to go a little bit more public on these matters, and I will do my level best to try to achieve this. Of course.
And Minister, sometimes when you look at the issues in Pakistan and indeed across the world, it's about getting the people that we speak to at high levels of governmental responsibility, is getting that down to the lower levels where it then branches out. How do we do that? Because if we can get that done, I think we can address many of the issues.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman is right. I mean, obviously, we do get to the highest level of access at the leading political leaders, and clearly we're now in also, as many members will be aware, in a pre-election period here in Pakistan, which is both a time of particular vulnerability for a lot of minorities, as we know, and we've touched upon the issue, and I feel it is entirely unacceptable that the Ahmadi, for example, are electorally disenfranchised. However, we do also work at a state-by-state level, and one of the things I've been quite keen to do in my visits, going out to Morden, I'll be heading out to Karachi and Lahore in due course, is to try and actually speak to senior state officials. As the honourable gentleman will be aware, with over 210 million citizens in Pakistan, it is a large country, and many of the states are as populous as parts of the United Kingdom as well. So, we have and will continue to raise with the Pakistan Ministry of Human Rights the issue of the protection of minority religious communities. I've also done so in writing to the Foreign Minister Kabaj Asif, and my ministerial colleague, I know Lord Ahmad, raised this issue as recently as February with the Pakistani Minister of Interior. The Ahmadi community are prevented, however, by the terms of the Pakistan Constitution and its penal code from not just practising their religion freely, but being electorally franchised, or indeed, dare I say it, from really being full members of the Pakistani community. That is unacceptable. We will state that here and now, and will continue to state it in our conversations with our Pakistani counterparts. Followers of other religions, including Christians and Shia Muslims, also suffer prosecution, and at the UN last November, the UK pressed Pakistan to strengthen the protection of minorities. We also urged them to explain the steps being taken to tackle the abuse of blasphemy and anti-terror laws, which leads to attacks against members of religious minorities. Algeria and Pakistan are not the only countries where this takes place. In Bangladesh, regrettably, the authorities have often failed to protect minority religious groups. I'm aware I'm being told by the whips that my time is almost upon me. I've tried to address many of the issues that have been taking place in this debate. If I may just briefly, with your indulgence, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say a little word about one or two of the issues that have been raised about counter-extremism work, which ultimately is a Home Office issue, but obviously it's an important aspect that we deal with. This government remains committed to tackling extremism in all its forms, violent and non-violent, Islamist and extreme far right and extreme far left. The threat from extremist influences continues to grow, and we're responding, I hope, with a cross-government, joined-up approach. We've also established a new commission for countering extremism with Sarah Khan as its first lead commissioner. She will provide support and advice to UK civil society to help them identify and challenge all forms of extremism. Whilst this currently has a domestic focus, it also recognises extremism needs to be tackled at source, which on many occasions can be traced to what happens overseas. The incidents of religious persecution in Pakistan have a tangible impact on community relations in the UK, and we are working very hard to reduce the risk of extremist influences being projected into our own communities. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have so much more I would like to say, but I do recognise that we do need to move on to other business. I've touched on very briefly the issues around social media and what needs to happen, and around entry clearance. But if I may conclude by saying this, can I reiterate that the Foreign Office will continue to promote freedom of religious belief for all. We'll do that right across the globe. We also intend to protect our communities here in the UK from the scourge of extremism by working with partners at home and abroad to counter extremist propaganda, by working with global internet service providers and other social media to ensure that we close down the space in which some of this terrible, divisive material can be disseminated, and by using every other means at our disposal to exclude from this country those who would do us harm. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you, and thank you for the House for what I think has been a very worthwhile debate today.
Siobhain McDonagh.
I'd like to thank Madam Deputy Speaker, the Backbench Committee, for allowing this time today. I'd like to thank the 8 backbench MPs, mainly from South West London, the best place in the world to live, who made speeches today, and for all those people who made interventions. I appreciate that this is a difficult day because it's as we go into recess, so I'm really grateful to the Shadow Minister, the Minister, the spokesperson from the SNP for being here. I don't think any of us should underestimate the power and the importance to the Ahmadiyya community of a debate of this sort taking place in the British Parliament on the floor of this chamber. It means that they are recognised and they are heard, and they desperately need to be heard.
The question is as on the order papers. Members of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.